Good morning, everyone. I'm glad to be back. So glad to be here in our final month of summer book reviews. Today we have Marianne Beseda. I'll have her introduce her book and the title of her book. Just want to make it apparent to you, the last two sessions are coming up after this session. We have next week with Mr. Lucky Swala, and then the week after that with Mr. or Dr. Andy Aikenbaum. He's a former Dean of Social Work at the University of Houston. He attends our Saturday service.
He wrote the book.
Yes, he actually wrote the book himself. And just a reminder, we will not be having summer book reviews on the 27th. We'll be having worship at the West Campus at 10:30. You're all invited. Please come and join us for that time. We're going to be giving thanks to God for the Reverend Beth Marie Halverson and the Reverend Shelley's work over there at our West Campus, and bidding them farewell. So I will make a note of that. I will make a note of that.
Yeah, they have that beautiful bended area every time waiting something, and it was very peaceful. So that starts. Let's just talk about peaceful or embracing the world. This is the book that I'm reviewing. It's called Life in 5 Senses. And the subtitle is How Exploring the Senses Got Me Out of My Head and Into the World. So the book was prompted, the author is Gretchen Rubin, and she's one of the happiness researchers. If any of you have heard about the Happiness Project, I think it was at Harvard, that they followed people for over 80 years and trying to determine what makes people happy. And she's been one of those researchers, and she's written books on that. But one thing that happened to her, and she's fairly young, I would say late 30s, maybe early 40s, and she went to the eye doctor. She had pink eye. And he goes, yeah, that's what you got. And as he was just putting things up and gave her medicine, he said, oh, and by the way, be sure to come back for an appointment, because since you're nearsighted, you're more likely to have a detached retina as you get older. Well, she freaked out by this. She'd never heard of this. Now, my doctor tells me that I'm very nearsighted, and he tells me, always be sure you come back for a visit. But she had never heard this. And all of a sudden, she's walking home. She was in New York City. She's walking home, and all she can think about is, I could lose my sight, And all of a sudden, you know how when you think you've just about lost something, you want it more. And all of a sudden, she started noticing the sky. She started noticing the tree, the grass. And she's like, I haven't been paying attention to these things. And so I liken that, and I'd love to hear some of your comments with what happened during COVID. During COVID, I know I'm very claustrophobic. And seeing those pictures of people in those ventilators just scared the dickens out of me. I just thought, oh my gosh, I would be so claustrophobic. And I just remember when I walked my dogs early in the morning, I would take these deep breaths. And I was just so pleased that my lungs were still working. I came to appreciate them more. Or walking along Gray's Bayou, seeing the birds, and that's when I started feeding the ducks and interacting with the ducks. I'm now the duck lady of Gray's Bayou. But I love those ducks. And we share it. They know me. As I'm walking, they're like flying in and like crash landing in front of me. And I love those ducks. And some people say, oh, they're an invasive species. I'm feeding them. And I'm like, well, don't you think the coyotes think humans are an invasive species? So that's about it. So I love those ducks. So did any of you have similar experiences during COVID where you started appreciating some things more?
Yeah, what else could you do?
It was a crazy time. I mean, I remember driving through Houston and it was wonderful to drive. Exactly. But, I had to go pick something up and I was like, there's nobody here. It was just, it was very, very different.
Well, they forced it to slow down.
True.
I saw children riding their bicycles down our street, which never happens. And it was so wonderful to see kids riding their bicycles in the street. That's wonderful.
Exactly. That's a celebration of life. So, anybody else?
Well, they did studies about taste, like people would bite an apple. This is the New York Times editorial. She experienced biting an apple like she was a child after having COVID. Did you read that? Or
I did not.
Yeah, so this was early on in the epidemic. Actually, this may be where she got her ideas from, because people were noticing that they were tasting things for the first time. That sensation.
Yes, and I know last year, I think it was last year. Yes, last year, my boyfriend got COVID and he had a pretty bad case. He had to have the monoclonal antibodies and all of that. And he was in Cyprus. And so I would bring him groceries, chicken noodle soup, all these things that you think are going to help. And it made him feel better. But I'll never forget one time. And so he would stand at his doorway and I would stand and I'd put the stuff down. And all of a sudden, one time when I dropped some stuff off, he said, I can smell the perfume again. Oh, that's so good. Because he couldn't smell for so long. And that really affected people, that sense of smell. So in this book, Gretchen Rubin goes through all the five senses: seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching. So let's talk about seeing. She says, when a conflict arises, sight usually wins. If you're smelling something, touching something, or seeing something, usually sight is that first one. And she has a really great story. Now, I never watched Game of Thrones, but I know what it is. But evidently, let's see if I can find that. It says, in 2019, fans of the fantasy TV show Game of Thrones shared a big laugh when a stray to-go coffee cup, complete with plastic lid and insulation sleeve, accidentally appeared on the castle's banquet table amid flickering candles, animal horns, and goblets. Despite many layers of scrutiny from editors, producers, and executives, no one spotted it because they were focused on other elements as they reviewed the dailies. So I thought that was really funny. And then there's the classic story of people being tested where you're asked to watch 6 participants line up on the stage with 3 wearing black t-shirts, 3 wearing white t-shirts. A voice instructed, count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball. And each team started bouncing and passing the ball. So this is Gretchen. She says, I faithfully watched the white team and was surprised when I learned that the answer was 16 passes. I only caught 15. Then the announcer asked, did you spot the gorilla? No, because I'd been tracking the ball. I failed to notice when someone in a gorilla costume strolled right through the action. So that's a very famous case of we're not paying attention, So
I have a story like that.
Okay.
When I was in Africa, a group of us were in this minivan, and the driver puts on the brakes and said, I wonder how he's doing today. And we're like, who? There was an elephant right beside us. None of us saw the elephant.
Wow.
And
Missing the
then,
elephant in the room.
Yeah, right.
I went to the hotel and it had an open air lobby. And so a herd of warthogs ran through the lobby. And I was listening to people, and one person said, that looks like a herd of warthogs. And then another person said, that is a herd of warthogs. So for me, it was an incredible experience of how if you don't expect to see something, you can't see it. And then after I got back home after 3 weeks of that, whenever trees rustled or anything, I'm looking, what? But so I've become a little more attuned to what's right around me. But it was just an incredible experience. You can only see what you expect to see.
This is true. It's very, very true. And so she noticed for the first time that when you look at a FedEx truck, and I hadn't noticed this, not the biggest picture, but here in white, there's an arrow. You know, that's part of their logo. But you're looking in the dark colors and you don't notice in white, there's this arrow there. And then she shows on an 8 of diamonds, that's an 8 in there. See it? You know, once you start looking at it, you see these patterns. See how it's the circles? It's 8. And for in Baskin Robbins, the BR also has a 31. So we all know they're known for their 31 flavors.
Yeah.
The Baskin Robbins?
Yeah, leave it there so we can see it.
There you go. Secrets 31. Right here, right in the middle, it's the 31. So, you know, sometimes these things are put in there and we just don't notice them. And that's her point, that we can have these things in our lives and we just don't see them. So she decided that one thing she was going to do as her exploration of the senses is that she lives in New York City, that she would go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art every day. And so unless they were out of town, she was there every day. And so she would learn to look at different things. And she went the first time with a friend who's an artist. I have this quote that I found really interesting. Find that page where she says, where she was looking at a stone bowl, but she said, her friend who's an artist said, all art is actually about death, but not in a bad way. We're standing in front of a tomb and the whole museum is a tomb. It's evidence of us being human on earth, what it means to be alive. That's a pretty heavy, you know, for an artist to say that. All art is actually about death, but not in a bad way. So when you think about that, I do find it very, you know, very, very interesting. And how just being mindful, which is a good word to use for what she was doing, being mindful about seeing things is she noticed that they had some books stacked up somewhere and it was blocking the light from their apartment window. And all of a sudden she realized, I want to see that light. And they started moving some things around. And we all have done that, right? Where we put things and then later on we go, that doesn't look right. You know, let's change it. But sometimes we just throw stuff down and yes, and so that happens. Yes.
Our son is an artist and was kind of that from an early age. And one of the issues, we had this house that had some wood paneling on with a couple of knotholes. And he was terrified by those eyes looking at him. So we had to go put paint, cover up those knotholes. But you know, and another example, we were down in Mexico at Chichen Itza. And you know, he was fairly young at the time, and you were looking at this big pyramid, and then he says, "Oh, look at the snake." And that going down the edge of the steps of the pyramid was clearly this snake in stone, you know, that was created there. But you know, if you look at the big picture, you don't see.
Right. It's like looking at that Baskin Robbins 31 or the FedEx arrow, you know, which I'd never noticed before.
And this same son of ours who we had to figure out, oh my gosh, he's just different, you know. When he was 3, he wanted to know why Jesus wears pantyhose. So
well, you know, in all the pictures.
Well, I mean, it's like further. And so anyway, I was in an art history class years later and found out why. That someone that's holy or spiritual, they're not going to be hair on their body because that's a symbol of sexuality. So I thought, okay, he's not quite as strange. And
That's
golly.
yeah, that
Oh,
and
golly.
sometimes you'll get those really great questions from children because it's totally unfiltered, and they'll give you one of these questions, and it's really important as a parent to recognize that and kind of celebrate it, I think. So
And not be freaked out entirely.
oh yes, and so now that I've got grandchildren, you know, I love all the different, you know, things they say.
differently.
Yes, yes, most definitely. So, and then she even brought up people's addiction to mobile phones, cell phones, and the bright colors. And so one thing a friend showed her how to do was to change the colors on the phone to grayscale, where it's all gray instead of all the colors. And that, especially if you have younger children who are using it, it doesn't make them quite as addictive to them. And she says, so sometimes when she wants to let go, she'll switch back to grayscale, but other times she wants to see the color. So I thought that was really interesting. I've never tried, I didn't get on my phone and try to change it to grayscale, but I thought that was, but here's some of her mindfulness. As the winter days passed, I realized that my 5 senses experiment was having an effect. I was seeing the world more clearly. I was noticing more. When I met a friend for coffee, I paid attention to her retro style. When I put on makeup, I noticed how the pink powder shimmered in its compact and how my pale eyelashes popped into view as I brushed on dark mascara. As I walked through the apartment, I loved catching sight of my collection of scarlet items. That's one thing she did at the Met. She started finding things that were red, just to choose a color. So, and she says, although I'd seen Jamie's her husband, although I'd seen Jamie do it hundreds of times, I really noticed his daily habit of sizing himself up after he got dressed. He stood in front of the mirror, squared his shoulders, then patted his chest a few times as if to say, okay, ready for action. So these are just those comforting things that we don't always notice. So, and she said, why bother to look at Jamie when I see him day after day? Because the day may come when I'll think, I would give anything to gaze into his face one more time. I didn't want the people most important to me to fade into the background wallpaper of my existence. Sharpening my sight sharpened my appreciation of what I loved most. Isn't that beautiful? So it just gives us a reminder that, yes, let's notice those things. Let's go on to hearing. So, you know, some people start to have problems with hearing as they get older. And so she talked about her dad finally getting hearing aids and how much happier he was, that we all like to hear things. I think about my dogs, they hear things better than I do, you know, and I let them alert me for some things. But she talks about, she said that I wanted to pay more attention to my sound environment. So she decided to start with music. All human societies have music, and music plays an important role in activities as varied as dancing, physical work, military exercises, and religious observances. And of course, here at Christ the King, we know all about the importance of music. While we don't all use the same scales, musicians in sub-Saharan Africa and the Middle East and China make different, distinctive choices. We all know what sounds like music to our ears. Researchers puzzle over why a practice as unnecessary for survival is nevertheless pervasive. Perhaps it's related to our use of language or a need to come into rhythm with other people or to build a community. So, the music has a dramatic influence on our bodies, our minds, and our behavior. For instance, listening to music during medical procedures can lower a patient's heart rate, blood pressure, and anxiety level, and music can help people to manage pain. And just as music helps patients, it can help doctors. Surgeons listen to music in the operating room to help them stay focused and relaxed. Research shows that listening to music during exercise boosts performance and makes exertion seem less strenuous. So when I've been with Terry at her, what is that called? Jazzercise. It's lots of music, but I still got exhausted. So I'm sure I would do better if I did it as often as you do. But it says, in general, our brains search for patterns and breaks in the patterns. And so I think we see that with music, that sometimes it's something different, sometimes it's something new. Let's see. Oh, and this was good. It said, even if music is always evolving, we are not. Throughout our lives, we tend to listen to the kind of music we listened to when we were 20 or younger, because that's when our musical taste was established. If we're older than 25, when a new form of music appears, as hip hop did in the late 70s, we probably won't enjoy it as much. Okay, any confession?
Absolutely. Yeah.
What's that?
Oh, I think rock is only playing the TV. I mean, it's for all the people already stopping and thinking. Yes,
Exactly.
I have a contrary. My husband did not grow up in an atmosphere of classical music. I introduced him to that. And he is now we're Mercury, Houston Symphony, the whole thing. So
It's an evolved,
it came much later for him.
Okay. And I will tell you, I grew up on this farm in a little town of 300 people, and we didn't have classical music in Abbott, Texas. And as I grew older, I did come to love it. I'm not as knowledgeable as someone like you, but I do appreciate it. And I used to have season tickets to the symphony and, just feeling that music. I'm a big fan of New World Symphony since my background is Czech. And so I love hearing New World Symphony. And to me, it just, brings back so many great memories. So, but don't you think even here at Christ the King, you'll think about some performance you've heard, or, someone who's saying something and chanting. It's really, to me, it's just part of how wonderful church is.
I think also in terms of hearing, it's not just music. I think there's a fascination with language itself, and particularly, one of the things, you're recognizing patterns, that idea of patterns, that, part of the thing of puns is it's a pattern, but it's not, that kind of funny thing where it kind of creates that, oh, no, that sense of intrigue kind of,
Yes,
little kids really like language. I mean, our grandchildren play with language all the time, creating new words.
And this is how, and they learn so much that way. She came up with a manifesto for listening, how to listen to people. It's a little long, but it's pretty good. Number one, show my attention, turn my body and eyes to face the other person. Put down my book or phone, nod, make contact, take notes. Don't rush to fill a silence. Ask clarifying questions, paraphrase or summarize to show that I understand or not. Respect what other people want to talk about. If they raise a subject, discuss it. If they steer away from a subject, don't bring it up again unless necessary. Don't jump in with judgments or suggestions. That's really good. And she says, I often urge people to read a particular book, that if someone's really looking for something, you'd say, read this book rather than giving them the advice. Stow my phone. One study found that the mere presence of a phone makes people sitting around a table feel more detached and less inclined to start a meaningful conversation. Listen for what's not being said. Another important distinction. Don't avoid painful subjects. Ooh, that's like talking to your family, right? Sometimes things are painful. Let people talk themselves into their solution rather than supply my solution. And when in doubt, stop talking. So, aren't those good? I think those those made a, that's her manifesto for listening. But she also talks about the importance of silence. And so she did an experiment where for 3 days, she didn't say a word, listen to a podcast or audiobook, watch TV, or listen to music. I live in crowded New York City, so when I went outside, I didn't hear music and people speaking, but no one talked to me. I loved it. The silence refreshed me. I felt relaxed in a way that I'd never felt before. So I don't know if I could do that before. What do y'all think?
You have to work at it.
You really would.
I've had the experience of being on a couple of silent retreats years ago, which was probably 24 hours or, but yeah, you have to work at it. But in which, if you were going to do it for longer, you probably need to work at it, gradually and get there. But yeah, when you're finished with it, it's really a wonderful experience. You do feel a lot. You feel calmer and just more in tune with things.
Y'all think that's something y'all would try? 3 days. That just seems so long to me.
It'd be harder in Houston because people would talk to you here. I'm not surprised that no one talked to her in New York.
That's a good point.
Another grandkid story. Our grandson a couple of years ago said, "Poppy, I'm kind of worried about dying." I said, "I don't think you have to worry about it too much." I said, "Yeah, but I really like to talk."
He was 5.
So close that you would be able to talk if you did. So
That's a good point. I just think, there's been other books written, and she wrote one on the Happiness Project. And, what it was showing is as we get older, what's really important to our well-being is to have social interaction. And a friend of mine, her dad is going through early Alzheimer's, and the mother's had some medical problems. And they were always planning to, live in their house forever and ever. And all of a sudden, her dad, who isn't, sometimes is lucid, he said, "Now I understand why people go to those senior living places, because you get to see other people and they're feeling isolated in their own home." And so I just think for all of us, I think Christ the King is a great place for social interaction. I think, you get to talk to people. I think these book reviews this summer, you're engaging your brain. And, I go, usually to Saturday evening service, contemplative worship. And there's this couple that has started bringing their boys who are 8 and 9. And there's something different about that service when there are children there. And they're pretty well behaved, they're still playing with stuff, making some noise, but we all love it, and so the parents came last night. I said, "Where are the boys?" "Oh, they're not coming tonight." I'm like, "Oh, I missed them." So, but I think Christ the King affords a lot of opportunities, for people. Anybody else want to chime in on that?
I think it's striking the decline of attendance at churches. People are losing that social, and there's all this writing about the loneliness epidemic and so on. And I think, under Christ the King, go to Palmer, don't, but they don't. And we should be concerned about that.
And I love people. I love everyday people. And I have no problem just talking to someone I've never met before and just yakking about stuff. And, you learn so much from different people. And they don't have to be like me. They be very, very different. And it's, I just found that, like, when I retired, I retired earlier than I wanted to, but I was technology director at one of the big school districts. And we got a new superintendent, and he came from Houston ISD, and he wanted all of the top jobs to go to his cronies. And so here I've been the technology director for 17 and a half years. I've been chair of the Texas State group, you know, all of the above, and they just shoved me over to a different position. And so I knew I had a 2-year contract. So I knew that they couldn't touch me for 2 years, and they couldn't touch my salary. So I realized I'm going to have to retire. And I wasn't ready to retire. But so I did. And let me tell you, those first 2 years, even being a member of Christ the King, those first 2 years were really hard for me. I was not mentally ready. I hated just existing. Well, and just not having, we were like my department, it was the technology department, we were like a family. And I hired a bunch of kids that had been in high school, and they were still there, you know, and they were all different religions and colors, and we were just this big happy family, and we loved each other. And I miss that so much. That was my substitute family, and I loved helping those kids. And so it took me 2 years to finally say, okay, you've been moody for 2 years. It's time to, you know, to find something else. And so I started finding more volunteer things to do and more things to do and spending more time with my grandchildren. But we're not meant to be isolated, I don't think. And, you know, y'all, yes.
This morning, I walk at Kroger because I know bumps and you're bumping away in cars.
Mm-hmm.
And I walked in, there was a lady coming out. She said, oh, this is my social exercise for the day. I go between 6 and 8, there's nobody there. I get to know everybody who works there. I talk with them, and I go to doctors. And that's my social thing.
Yes, and I tend to do that with, I go to both Central Market and I go to Einstein's Coffee, and I'll sometimes see Ernie there, but and I've gotten to know the kids who work there and the employees who work there. And so since I go there pretty much every day and get coffee, like right before Christmas, I'll put like $60 in their tip jar. And I'm like, okay, y'all be sure to divide this up. So those kids that work there, they love me, you know, but we're always yakking about football or, you know, or something. And, you know, it again, and there's a guy originally from Hong Kong who's there. He's older, he's a runner, and Richard, and he and I will talk, you know, check up on some things. And I've met a really good friend there. And so she and I meet for coffee twice a week. And so all of that just makes a difference, you know, to you mentally. Okay, let's go to smelling.
Did she, in her research, did she do these sequentially? Or, I mean, was she doing these visuals experiments or at the same time she was doing hearing ones, or did she do kind of one by one?
She would kind of do one at a time, but mixed up. You know, not this.
Not always 100%.
Right. Oh, and here's one of her quotes again from hearing, where she said, by attending to my senses, I could give myself a healthy respite from my usual worries. I could slip away from bad feelings by pausing to watch as white cream slowly laced its way through the black of coffee, or to listen to the grinding rattle of a snowplow. Well, we don't hear that. Pushing its way down an avenue during a storm, a sound that for some reason I've always loved. Unlike the distractions of the digital world, which tried to hijack my mind, this purposeful redirection of my attention to my physical surroundings gave me a boost of vitality and feeling of connection. I thought that was really important. My body was a refuge. I could return to it again and again to calm my soul. So think about that. So that's where being mindful and looking at these things. So that was the end of this section on hearing.
Well, one thing I think about too is how much I hate the gasoline powered leaf blowers. You know, so I have contacted, you know, people on council and sent them a lot of information that a lot of cities are banning leaf blowers. And I mean, it could be an electric one, battery powered, but it is amazing how much that bothers me. You know, I'm going to go sit outside and coffee, and then I guess I'm not going to sit outside.
I walk in the morning, and that's the same thing. And I also worry about the guys using.
Oh yeah, it's poison. They're hearing and it's poison. So please contact your city council person, please.
Okay, so when she gets to smelling, and she talks about COVID very early in the chapter. In the United States and elsewhere, the COVID-19 pandemic changed the tendency to undervalue the sense of smell, because infection can cause loss or alteration of the sense of smell, and with it, taste. People realize smell is important. After she got COVID-19, a friend lost her sense of smell and taste for a few months. She told me, I felt claustrophobic. The world felt stale and airless. And it said, she says here, whatever the cause, people who can't smell miss important warnings, such as the smell of meat that's gone bad, smoke, and leaking gas. They have trouble eating healthy. Some people lose weight because food no longer tastes good, while others gain weight because food never seems satisfying. So I thought that was really, really interesting point. But she also talked, a really good part was where she talked about so many of your memories are related to scent.
Triggered us.
Exactly, that it's smelling something, you think, oh, that's the perfume my mother always wore. Or this is, you know, there's something about that clean, sweet smelling baby. Just smelling your baby, just, you know, their little feet. I love smelling their feet. You know, I just thought they were so cute. So maybe that was weird, but I did. You know, it was just, it was a sensation, you know. And I when I had my first child, I was just overwhelmed with the emotion I felt. And so I still remember how much I just enjoyed, you know, after he had his bath, how the baby smelled, and that wonderful baby smell. So
Stop and smell the roses.
yes, most definitely. Most definitely. But she says, our five senses give us information about the present state of the world, such as the state of the dog's paws. You know, because I've smelled my dog's paws many times to see if something's changed. And our senses also help us to recall memories. We glimpse a long vanished room in a photo. We hear the snatch of an old song on the radio. We bite into a food we haven't eaten since childhood. We feel the weight of an old pair of boots, and memories come flooding back. But for many people, the sense of smell seems to hold a special power to evoke the past. Perhaps for some reason related to brain wiring, but perhaps because the memories sparked by smell often overtake us without warning, so we're struck by them more intensely.
I've been struck by the fact that, you know, if we're losing our sight, or our sight is not as good, we can get glasses. If our hearing is not as good, we have ways of doing that. But if our sense of smell deteriorates, as far as I know, there is no medical solution or engineering solution that help with that. And the fact that, you know, like police can have night vision glasses, they can have special hearing things, but we still rely on dogs to sniff out problems.
Right. Yes.
I think of all of our senses, at least for me, smell is the most underappreciated. Not just in terms of safety or in memories, but just, you know, we don't actively think about what this room smells like. And for me, I mean, I actually do. I smell for whatever reason in my brain, it's the most important sense. So Ed and I have a little lake house in Maine. Recently had this about 5 years ago. And when we go, and it's a beautiful area, there's a lake and it's a mountain and trees and it's very rural. When we go there, I mean, all that's wonderful, but the first thing, and I get out of the vehicle and I just breathe and smell that environment, and it just and it's my personal head, just is a calm. And it's not a memory because it's new, but it's just an overwhelming happiness. Yeah, to have that smell.
You know, I grew up on a farm, and I don't miss much about living in a small town or living on a farm, but I miss the sky at night because you could see there wasn't the air, light pollution, and so you could see the Milky Way, you know. And I also miss just the smell of, or when the corn's been cut, you could smell that smell, or the colors of the maize as it turns to dark.
But when you were there, did you smell that?
I would. I didn't appreciate it. I didn't appreciate it as much, but I always did appreciate the stars. I loved the stars, and so, but there were certain smells, you know, in the in you know, on the farm that I did, you know, I didn't like so much the cows in the pasture, you know, and things like that. So that you know, and now there are more houses being built in that way. So even little Abbott's getting, you know, a little overpopulated.
I mean, it's also a sense of peace. And again, it's not a memory. So when we come back, we're in Maine for a while. We were there for 3 weeks. We came back, and we have an old house. We renovated multiple times, but it still has its old floor, and it has a smell. But I mean, walk in, and it's that old house smell. And you know, people might find that's horrible, but I love it. It's just it's really true.
And she had one quote from a friend who lost her smell during COVID, and she said what she missed the most was lying in bed with her husband. She missed smelling his skin, you know, cuddling up with him and smelling his skin, because she couldn't smell it with COVID, and so she finally got it back, and that was something that she really remembered. When I'm walking my 2 dogs in the morning, you know, I'm just amazed, and I always say they're on olfactory overload, you know, because they live through their sense of smell, and they know so much, and so they're constantly, you know, I call it checking their pee nail. You know, they're checking where some other dog has peed, and they're checking it, and it's really, really important to them, you know, to have that sense of smell. And like you say, you look at what we've done as far as, you know, they help us with finding lost people, and you know, look at what some of them did. They ended up dying from 9/11. Some of those dogs that went there to look for the people, if there was anyone left alive, all that dust and stuff, it killed some of those rescue dogs. And so they're brave helpers for us.
And I came to this country when I was 13.
Mm-hmm.
And then back maybe, I think I was around 35. And we came in the airport, and I bought an apple. And for the first time, I smelled an apple. Oh, wow. Because in this country, in the grocery store, you don't usually smell the fruits and the vegetables. I guess I grew up smelling it.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. That's very cool. And she says here, Andy Warhol exploited the power of smell to evoke memories. He'd wear a perfume for 3 months and then never wear it again, so that its scent reminded him of that time. Yes. Isn't that interesting? And actually, she starts off the book with a quote from him, which seems like a finger, where Andy Warhol says, "Nobody really looks at anything. It's too hard." Interesting. So she's got some Andy Warhol quotes that are kind of interesting. So, but she said, inspired by Warhol, I bought a bottle of Tea Rose perfume. Although I've always loved this fragrance, I stopped wearing it long ago because it's unusually heavy and rich. But when I realized how vividly it reminds me of my senior year of college, when I wore it as my special party perfume, I decided to keep a bottle on a shelf as an easy way to evoke memories of that time. So yes, I do think smell really brings back, the memories.
And one perfume that for me is the scent. Yves Saint Laurent L'Homme Libre is like, when I think of my M. de Vere's, that was the scent. Yeah. That's 3 years of like using the same cologne.
I have a friend that said because of the intense connection between memory and scent, that a really good exercise for older people to either help ward off Alzheimer's type diseases or slow them down is to buy a whole set of essential oils. And every day you take them and you smell one and you say, ah, frankincense, you know, and lavender. And it's supposed to be really valuable in enhancing memory.
Yeah, we do tend to remember smells. So, and let's go on to tasting.
Which is smell.
They're very closely connected. And she talked about, she decided to gather remembrances that taste has in a timeline. I tried to recall the tastes that were most typical for food and drink that I tasted during that period. So like childhood, certain Winstead burgers, I don't know what those are. Pop-Tarts, my sister and I love strawberry Pop-Tarts. My mother's meatloaf. My father's Swedish pancakes, Golden Graham cereal, they had that a lot. So those tastes evoke childhood. College and law school. I love this one, White Russians. My roommates and I made these heavy sweet drinks during freshman year. Doesn't that sound like something a freshman would drink? Rice pudding from Naples Pizza. I lived across from this hangout, which is famous for its rice pudding. Sangria and tortilla chips from a certain restaurant. So Diet Peach sample. She drank a lot of that. So yeah. My daughter's childhood's baby food. Every once in a while I suck a taste. Pepperidge Farm goldfish. My daughters love these cheery orange fish shaped crackers. Cheerios, they were really into that. Shredded wheat cereal with salsa. Not if I ever invented, I'm sort of vehicle for salsa that was healthier than. Okay, well, that's why I admit it doesn't look appealing. It's delicious. I'll take a look. Sure.
I can do that.
And so, okay, so for today, every morning she eats an electric waffle maker. She heats the electric waffle maker, puts 2 eggs with shredded cheddar, cheese, and then pours it onto the waffle maker and makes an egg waffle. Almonds, I leave a lot of almonds. Cauliflower and broccoli. Okay, I agree with her on that. Never tire of cauliflower and broccoli. Cobb salad, frozen raspberries. So she was saying these are tastes that invoke these different parts in my life. And we all go through where we think we like something and then we grow out of it, you know, that type of thing. And I think I had a few White Russians when I was in undergrad, but then I realized that they was way too sweet for anything I wanted. You know, she was finding the different parts of her life that she found these things. And she spends a lot of time talking about ketchup, which surprised me. She says, we don't give ketchup much thought, and many people even dismiss it as the condiment that undiscriminating eaters use to overpower the flavor of anything it touches. The flavor of ketchup, however, is exceptionally complex. Heinz ketchup is the rare food that has the magical ability to hit each of the 5 basic tastes: sweet, sour, bitter, salty, and umami. That span may explain why ketchup is well loved both as itself and also as the secret ingredient in many popular foods such as chili, meatloaf, and stir fries. So I thought that was, you know, she really had this thing about ketchup, and I never thought of ketchup being that interesting. So anyway, and then here, each one's to you unloaded. So she said, as I prepared to leave the subject of taste, I recognized deeper changes in myself. I first felt a shift on my unforgettable walk home from the eye doctor's office, when I'd been startled into a new awareness of my senses. Now, even when I was doing everyday activities unrelated to my official 5-sentence experiment, I was flashing into sensation focus mode. I noticed the woody, grassy scent of a liquor store. I listened to Here Comes the Sun as it played over a bookshop's loudspeaker. I picked up the faint taste of lime as I took a bite of avocado salad. So she's just encouraging us to keep, really focusing and being mindful about those things. Let me get to the last part, which is touching. And touching, she talks about skin. And she says, I rarely thought about my skin, but just like every part of the body, it was wonderfully designed. Skin is one of our largest organs, weighs 8 to 15 pounds. When spread out, is almost the size of a twin mattress, and is flexible and selectively permeable. It takes many forms, thickest on the heels, thinnest on the eyelids. She said, and the eyelids are 20% transparent, so morning light can help our internal clock stay calibrated. Thought that was interesting. And both hairy and smooth. In some areas, the skin can pick up very faint sensations, while in others, it registers only vague impressions. So, the sense of touch can replace or supplement other sensory information. A sidewalk strip of gridded bumps warns a pedestrian where the sidewalk leads into the street. A bed shaker alarm clock wakes a sleeper by using vibrations instead of sound. So, she said touch can make an object more enjoyable. On our many mismatched coffee mugs, the tall brown and white striped mug is my favorite because it feels so good in my hands. For those of us who love coffee, there are some cups that just feel right, And although we touch with our whole bodies, our hands play a unique role. And so we explore the world with our hands. And so she talks about, how many of you remember this book, Pat the Bunny? And Pat the Bunny, read it to your kids, the 1940 classic by Dorothy Kuhnhart. Slowly turning its battered pages, I felt the same pleasure I felt as a child as I patted the bunny's soft fur, lifted the little sheet of smooth fabric, felt Daddy's scratchy face, and put my fingers through Mummy's ring. Even as a 4-year-old, I realized that Pat the Bunny was different from other books because of the way it expanded past the usual visual limits. And then she brings up this important point. Many people feel a strong desire to touch and be touched. And in particular, babies don't develop properly without touch. Babies who get skin-to-skin contact gain weight more easily, sleep better, cry less, and get fewer infections. Many babies raised in the woefully understaffed Romanian orphanages in the 80s and 90s showed slow growth in behavior and cognitive issues. They weren't ever picked up. And so the importance of that. So I thought that was a really, really good point.
One thing I heard real interesting is someone said, that's the one sense of touch. I mean, that sense, you can't live without it. Sense of touch. You can live without all the rest of them, but you can't stay alive without it.
See, and here's, of course, those of you who know me know that I'm a huge dog lover. So she even says, what's more, the benefit of social touch isn't limited to the touch of another person. The loving, warm touch of an animal can provide tremendous comfort, as well as improvements in health. For instance, one study showed that a 10-minute encounter with a therapy dog helps lower patients' pain during their time in the emergency room. So we know how much animals are important, and I'm sure cats can kind of do it. Children turn to stuff away.
Perfect, I can say. When it jumps in the lap, that's a high point of the.
Okay. Children turn to stuffed toys and soft blankets for school, and so do adults. And so she talked about children liking warm blankets. And so I have the 3 grandsons, and a couple of years ago I was at Costco, and they had these great, blankets, and they had different colors, so I picked 3 different colors, and I asked my daughter, I said, do you think the boys will like these blankets as one of the Christmas gifts? They loved it, to the fact where the next year I got different ones, And so she said, okay, we've got some for upstairs, we got some for downstairs. But, you know, they loved it. And then I have a real good friend and we exchanged gifts for our grandkids. And so I got her grandkids. And so again, they love those blankets. And so it's just one of those things. I saw one of the guys that worked for me gave me years ago a fuzzy blanket, and it's got the design of the New England Patriots on it. It's for so many years I was a Patriots fan, and I still use that blanket every day. If the fan's coming in, I think it's a little cool. I'll pull that blanket on, and it's not in the best of shape, but damn, I love that blanket. So you know, it's that feel. It's that feel.
You know, one thing too, in the sense of touch, is the importance of recognizing pain. You know, that you know, to be attuned to that when it happens, you know, and you know, all of us have aches and pains of various types of different times, but you know, to kind of, you know, I think that's probably why we couldn't live without a sense of touch, because we'd end up killing ourselves. Yeah. You know, either we wouldn't fire, you know, so yeah.
So I hope, kind of in conclusion with this book, I hope this gives y'all some ideas about engaging with the world, being more mindful, doing it with your family, doing it with the people you love. You know, my mother's 102, so it's hard for her to sometimes remember some things, but I try to bring things to show her that, you know, her to touch, you know, at her age. And I will tell you, when my sisters had triple bypass surgery yesterday, and so I'm hoping to bring her a nice warm blanket or something as she gets out of the hospital and stuff, you know, because that touch will make people feel better. And so we need those things, but it's also like all of the senses, and it's engaging them, and it's smelling, it's seeing things, and it's really important for our mental health. So I hope y'all like the book. It's very different, kind of a different book.
Wonderful presentation.
Oh, thank you.
Just really good.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Have you personally adopted, after having read this, any particular, in any of the senses, things that you are doing differently than you did before you read the book?
I'm just being a little more mindful, like as I walk the dogs or feed the ducks. My grandsons are away at camp, but when they get back, you know, I'll be talking to them about it. I do think mindfulness is really, you know, really important, and trying to get them to understand it, and they just don't stare at a screen.
One thing I've done is we have this beautiful site, probably 60 feet tall, you know, the things very forward. And I've started at least once a day going out there and just experiencing being under it.
Oh, that's
you know, when you walk inside, you can immediately feel like a 10 degrees cool out. You know, it's just, and it's, you know, you're surrounded by this, the sounds of it, the feeling of it. Yeah, I think there's a thing that the Scandinavians call forest bathing.
Yes.
You know,
yes.
you just go out into the woods and experience that sense. And that's the closest I can come without driving 100 miles.
Do I have time to recommend a couple of books that I think would be complementary to this wonderful book, which I want to read? Diane Ackerman, a well-known poet and natural scientist, has written a book called The Natural History of the Senses. And it goes into great depth in a beautifully poetic way. And the other is by an author, Horowitz, and I can't remember her first name, but it's called On Looking. And she takes the same walk around a certain New York neighborhood with 11 different experts. And each time they see entirely different things. And I really recommend those books. Natural History of Senses and On Looking.
Well, I'm going to do my own looking next weekend. I'm going to Big Bend, and we're going to go watch the Cursed Meeting. And so it's going to be, but that's why you have to have a power fan.
Ooh, cool.
Very cool.
Great.
Yes, and we found this Airbnb that's an off-the-grid place that has solar power during the day, which don't have power at night. So it'll be pulsing. Patients still.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Marianne, for your wonderful, thank you very much for your wonderful presentation today. We hope to see you all in worship soon, but we'll hope to see you next week for Lucky Swallow's presentation. God bless you all. Take care.